Okay, obviously we're all excited about the latest crop of MacBook Pros. I mean, if you're not excited, you're probably not a Greg's Gadgets viewer, because for a while now, I think we've all been well aware of the rumors of Apple's first 3nm chips, and we got them a lot faster than I think a lot of us were expecting, right? And while I covered a lot about the base model M3 chip in yesterday's video, I actually found out a lot more information on Apple's latest M3 Pro and M3 Max chips that I wanted to share with you, because there are some surprising changes to these chips that I think buyers need to be made aware of, and it may have you picking one chip over the other. And also, this right here, this is absolutely insane. And when I think I said that the 16-inch MacBook Pro was basically going to be a Mac Studio and a laptop, I think I may have been right. I think I may have been right. Wow, that's, I gotta get this laptop. All right, so just a refresher, the M3 Pro and M3 Max both come with two different variations. You have the low-end M3 Pro with an 11-core CPU design, and then a 14-core GPU. And then there's the full version. It has a 12-core CPU and an 18-core GPU. And this is one point I want to make crystal clear, because I think there might be room for confusion based on Apple's past history of Apple silicon chip releases. You see, in the M1 and M2 generation of chips, the Pro and Max could always be configured with the same number of CPU cores. Both the M2 Pro and M2 Max max out at a 12 CPU core design. The only difference in the previous generation was in GPU cores, where the Max could always be outfitted with more GPU cores. So if you got a maxed out M2 Pro chip and a maxed out M2 Max chip, you would get the same CPU performance. Well, that's no longer the case. Apple is basically saying, you know what? We're gonna still give the M3 Pro a powerful chip, I'm not doubting that, right? But what we're gonna do is we're gonna unleash the top end here with the M3 Max, and that is exactly what they did, because the M3 Max now gets more CPU cores on both configurations. They get a 14 CPU core on the lower end model, and that's 2 more CPU cores than the M3 Pro at its highest end config. Of course, you still get more GPU cores in that model too. It's a 30-core GPU design on the low end model, but then get this, you go to the highest end M3 Max and you get 4 more additional cores on the CPU, a 16 CPU core design on the top end M3 Max. That's pretty crazy. Like that's 4 more CPU cores than the M3 Pro. So it sounds like it's going to be a significant boost in CPU performance. And of course, when you get that top end chip, of course you get more GPU cores too, right? It's 40 on the highest end configuration. And I know we're probably tempted to compare this on paper specs and equate these CPU cores, right? You're going to go, okay, well, the M3 Pro at its highest end has 12 CPU cores. The M3 Max at its highest end has 16 CPU cores, right? Well, you really can't do that, because there's kind of a trick here that Apple pulled, because the M3 Pro design is an equal split in high performance cores and efficiency cores. So you're smart, right? You know what half means, right? If we split the different, I'll just tell you, right? 6 performance cores and 6 high efficiency cores. Now, the performance cores are obviously the CPU cores that are delegated to the really intensive CPU tasks, while the high efficiency cores are energy efficient cores, right? They focus less on performance and more on energy savings, meaning they're not as powerful. Did I explain that well? I hope I did. Now, with the M3 Max on the highest end configuration, you're actually getting not 6 of those high performance cores, not even 8 of those high performance cores, not even 10 of those high performance cores, right? You're getting 12. Yeah, you look at Apple's newsroom release, you go read in the specs, you get 12 high performance cores. So that's literally double the high performance cores of the highest end M3 Pro configuration. And that means that the CPU performance should actually be even more significant on the Max. Like a lot more. So in theory, I guess on the highest end Max chip, you can probably pull like double the multi-core CPU performance over the M3 Pro, which is just an insane advantage bump that the Max chips didn't used to have. And don't forget, previous versions of the Max chip performed exactly the same in CPU performance as the Pro variants. So yeah, if you care about CPU performance and you want a lot of it, well, this time you kind of have to look at this Max chip and go, maybe I should get that. And hey, we are actually seeing our first glimpses of what this means for the M3 Max chip with leaked Geekbench scores, basically showing a massive improvement over the M2 Max chip, not only in single-core performance, but again in multi-core performance as well. I know this is just a benchmark, but just look at these improvements in CPU speed over the M2 Max. It is a 37% increase in total CPU multi-core performance, which is a huge year-over-year jump. In fact, this performance jump is so impressive that it is literally neck and neck with the multi-core CPU performance on Apple's M2 Ultra chip, the highest end chip that goes into their desktop Mac Studio and Mac Pro computers. That is just insane. Like these M3 Max chips within the span of 4 months, it was 4 months since the Mac Studio was released. Within 4 months, the laptops, the Apple laptops have caught up to the performance of the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro? What? So yeah, that is insane performance for a laptop. And also, as someone who's always thinking about what's next in the future, that M3 Ultra chip in like the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro is gonna be insane. Now, there are kind of some unanswered questions here for me, and that is how much will those extra 2 efficiency cores on the M3 Pro contribute to battery life savings, or rather, how much more will the battery on the M3 Max drain with double the performance cores and 2 less high efficiency cores? I think once people get their hands on these machines, it is likely that this time around, like the M3 Max is going to be a more power hungry chip when running at full speed. And I think it's likely in some of the tests we see as reviews start to come out, I think it's pretty likely that M3 Max versions of the MacBook Pro are going to have less battery life. I think if you get an M3 Pro version, you're probably gonna get better battery life. I think by measurable numbers. I don't know. I think. And how much heat will these beefy M3 Max chips generate? I know it's a more efficient 3nm process, but in my head, it just sounds mind-boggling that they could get a chip this performant without it generating any more heat. Like, I wonder if thermally, the 14-inch MacBook Pro is going to be okay because yeah, you can customize the 14-inch model with that full M3 Max chip. And when you think about the performance being stuffed into a smaller laptop design, number one, what an accomplishment. Good job, Apple. That is amazing that you're still giving us the highest end configs on the 14-inch model, but also, will it thermally throttle when you compare it to the 16-inch design? I don't have the answer to that, obviously, but it is something you should consider for yourself as you go and look at purchasing these new laptops. If you're gonna spec it out all the way in the 14-inch, and you're worried about any throttling, it may be a good idea to step up to the 16-inch. Maybe. Another consideration is some of the changes that Apple made to the memory bandwidth on the M3 Pro and the M3 Max models. Previously, in the M2 Pro, Apple touted 200 gigabytes of memory bandwidth, but this time around, Apple changed the memory configurations on the M3 Pro. So now they only ship with 3 6GB memory slots, which is why you get 18 gigabytes of memory instead of the old 16. It's kind of weird, right? But even though you're getting 2 gigabytes more memory, you're kind of getting a downgrade because each of those chips only has 50 gigabytes of memory bandwidth. So the result is, even though you have more memory, you're losing out on total memory bandwidth because Apple says the M3 Pro chip now only has 150 gigabytes of memory bandwidth, 50 gigabytes less than the M2 Pro. And this new change also caps the M3 Pro models at just 4 terabytes of maximum storage. Whereas with the previous versions of the M2 and M1 Pro, you could configure them up to 8 terabytes. And I think that's kind of like an unfortunate downgrade because the Pro chips have always been very capable and not everyone needed to step up to the max. So let's say you didn't need more performance, but for some reason you wanted 8 terabytes of storage. Well, now you have to step up to the max chip. You have to spend more money to get more storage. And I actually think that is going to be weird because the M2 Pro Mac Mini can currently be configured to up to 8 terabytes of storage. So when this Mac Mini eventually gets upgraded to the M3 Pro, it's probably not going to have an M3 Max option. And if that's true, Apple's basically going to have to take that computer like a step back. Like, oh, on the M2 Pro Mac Mini, we offered 8 terabytes, but now on the M3 Pro Mac Mini, the max you could do is 4 terabytes. And it's always weird when Apple kind of takes like a computer model and downgrades it like that. Like the previous version had more capabilities, and then the next version doesn't have those same capabilities. Now, the changes in bandwidth is a little different on the Max chip, but there's still changes. Now, previously, all versions of the M2 Max had 400 gigabytes of memory bandwidth, but this time around, if you go on Apple's website and start configuring these computers, You can see that the M3 Max with the 14 CPU cores only has 300 gigabytes memory bandwidth. Now, you still can get the full 400 gigabytes memory bandwidth. There's not really a total downgrade here, but you do have to get the full 16-core M3 Max option. Again, this has to do with the memory layout on these chips. In fact, you'll even notice that depending on which M3 Max chip you choose, you'll actually get different memory configurations there. So let's say you went for the lowest end M3 Max and you wanted to bump up your memory from 36 to 48 or 64 gigabytes. Well, you're unable to do that because the only other memory option is 96 gigabytes, which is a huge $800 price increase. Listen, I get that Apple is simplifying the memory layout on these chips, but chances are if you're getting a lower end M3 Max MacBook Pro, even though it's still an expensive laptop, right? It's probably because you're looking to at least save a little bit of money on your purchase over the higher end configs. So only having a memory jump go from 36 to 96 gigabytes, a huge $800 price increase for that amount of memory is kind of strange, right? Like you would think on the lower end configs, the jump up in memory would be in smaller increments, but you have to go for like a pretty big step. Like I can see some people maybe wanting 64 gigabytes of memory, but not necessarily needing the full like 96 gigabytes of memory, which is a lot. Furthermore, if you pick the full M3 Max chip option, even though this is listed as a $300 upgrade, it's actually a $500 upgrade because once again, you are forced into 48 gigabytes of unified memory to get the 400 gigabytes of memory bandwidth. And despite this being the highest end config, you actually have more options here on spending that amount of money because you can bump this up to 64 gigabytes of memory for $200 more, but then your next jump is up to 128 gigabytes of memory, missing out on that 96 gigabyte tier. Again, these configurations are a little strange and they aren't as straightforward as they used to be, so as you're configuring these MacBooks, just be made aware that you may see some unexpected price jumps and not every model supports every configuration. Now listen, I don't have these laptops, I don't know how much the memory bandwidth issue is going to play into the performance of these laptops. I suspect for most people, you probably won't notice it, and I suspect maybe it might be even hard to measure the performance difference, but I think the big question is, are these changes to the chip architecture worth it if it means that the M3 Max can get to these insanely high levels of performance and push the capabilities of Apple Silicon even farther? I think so. I think so, because the people that really need this top level of performance are probably more than happy to pay for it, even if it means that you have to go through some strange configuration options. As for your configuration on what you should buy, I still think for most people, even though we didn't talk about it in this video, the base M3, right? It's probably going to be fine. The M3 chip itself is going to be fine for 80 to 90% of the people out there. But hey, if you're a pro and if you're watching this video, you know it's a MacBook Pro, it's only fair to assume you're doing something pretty intensive. I think, that M3 Pro chip, the base model, the one that starts at $2,000, is probably going to be a good buy. Like I think it's going to be probably the best bang for your buck with that 18 gigabytes of memory. But, the M3 Pro, it does have limitations. Like it can only support 2 external displays, where like the M3 Max can do like 4 external displays. And again, the M3 Max not only gets better GPU performance this year, but also gets CPU performance. So there's actually more people this time around that should consider the Max upgrade, because before you only had to worry about GPU. So if your, workloads didn't include any GPU like usage, then you wouldn't even have to worry about the Max chip upgrade. But if your work has a lot of CPU usage, like if you're a developer and you're pegging that CPU, you want the fastest CPU chip possible in a laptop, well, it's actually strange because you would think as years go on, as these chips advance, less people would have to consider the Max, but it's actually the opposite. More people should consider the Max this year if they really value either CPU or GPU performance, or even if they want something like 8 terabytes of storage. It's only possible on the Max models now. But yeah, we'll know soon enough just how these chips pan out in real world usage, because these Macs are going to be released in just a few days. So if you want even more information about these MacBook Pros and how they perform, get subscribed, like the video, because I'm handsome. I'm very handsome. And if I deem you worthy, I will grace you with my appearance in the next video.